speaking with Roderigo, he will use Roderigo's desire for Desdemona and Roderigo's jealousy of Othello to begin now the plot that Iago will lay out. And it's a simple one, quite frankly. He's going to use Cassio, the player of our play. Think Lancelot from our earlier study of Arthur. Cassio is a sad character in our play. He has clear faults. He's willing to admit them. He has vices. He has weaknesses, and Iago will use those against him ultimately to wound Cassio deeply. It will be then for Iago the simple plan. He says, we're going to ruin Cassio, and in the process, theoretically then, Roderigo will get Desdemona. And a lot of this is about money. We saw that in the opening lines where Roderigo's been giving Iago all kinds of money. We will have another Iago soliloquy at the end of 2:1 that is compelling. Here we will learn that Iago's kind of made up in his mind that Othello's been sleeping with his wife, and maybe even so did Cassio, and this will kind of legitimate in his mind what he's going to do. He says, the way I'm going to take Othello down is jealousy. Later, the green-eyed monster, it will get called. And more importantly than anything, Othello's never going to see it coming. Act 2, Scene 2, Othello will be happy. And he will say, tonight we feast. There's a lot of debate as you study this play closely as to the notion of when Othello will consummate his marriage with Desdemona. It's pretty clear it probably doesn't happen the night in Venice because of the disruption. And the idea is here for Othello, he's going to leave Cassio in charge, keep the peace. You guys party and have a good time. Keep everybody safe. There seems to be an unspoken notion that Cassio is not to be the one drinking, but everyone else drinking and partying, while Othello says, I'm going to go have fun with my new wife. Well, we can really quickly see in Scene 3 of Act 2 that things are going to go terribly, terribly sideways. Let's take a look now at how it unfolds. Iago will begin by challenging Cassio to take it easy and to have a drink. Cassio will admit, I'm not a very good drinker. I can't hold my liquor, and if I drink, some bad things will happen. Using peer pressure, put this in your notes at a 3A observation, using peer pressure that's similar in some ways to the ways that Lady Macbeth will convince Macbeth about the stupidity of a plan to kill Duncan in their own house. Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 7. We got something similar going on here. Once Iago gets Cassio to drink 1 cup, it's over. Iago will, in the meantime, speak privately with Montano about his concerns about Cassio and his drinking, and sure enough, Cassio and Roderigo will show up on stage ready to fight. Roderigo, of course, has set all this up. When Montano steps in, Cassio will wound Montano, and then the plot is set. Othello will show up frustrated. He will ultimately, because of confusion, ask Iago, honest Iago, tell me what's going on. And Iago has this brilliant ability to go, man, I really don't like the task I've been given. Okay, fine, I'll tell you. And it will then fall to Othello to fire Cassio. And in this moment now, the plot will begin to thicken, as they say. Leaving Cassio and Iago on stage together. Now, one of the most disturbing things about this play and watching Iago work is that Iago is so capable, linguistically, so capable of getting somebody to trust him. So that Cassio will sidle up to Iago and say, man, I need your help. And Iago says, I really think I can help you. Here's what I recommend that you do. Why don't you go to Desdemona? You know her. You're friends of hers. And go to her and ask her for some help. Iago afterwards will then speak about the ways that he will bury Othello, speaking directly to the audience about putting Othello in pitch. There's all kinds of racist language here as well. And in the end, we look at Iago by the end of the second act and we recognize there's nothing that's going to stop this guy from doing the thing that he's about to do. Darkly disturbing. Act 3 will hold one of the most important scenes in all of Shakespeare. Certainly the third act of Othello is one that should be studied closely, and I'm doing it an injustice by simply summarizing it, but let's go to work. First of all, Cassio is in scene 1. Cassio's going to ask Emilia, can I please speak with Desdemona? In scene 2, you've got Iago with Othello alone. And this is going to allow for Cassio and Desdemona to have their conversation. In scene 3 of Act 3, one of the most compelling scenes, I said in our study of Macbeth that Act 4, Scene 2 is one of the most compelling scenes. If I had to pick another scene that I would lecture you guys on for quite some time, it would be this scene. Unfortunately, I've got to go through it quickly, but let's watch how it unfolds. Desdemona will promise Cassio to help him. Of course I'll help him. You and my husband are best friends. Obviously I'll help him. Othello comes on stage with Iago, and Iago just makes a real quick comment about, wow. Something to the effect of, I'm not sure I like what I just saw. Cassio, of course, runs away, not wanting to create a scene, and this leaves him looking obviously guilty of something, right? But it only takes one comment. And then, because there have been some obvious references already to this notion about the relationship between Cassio and Desdemona. See, Iago only has to ask some simple questions like, before you got married, who was it that was having some conversations with Desdemona on your behalf? Oh, that was my best friend Cassio. Really? Yeah, really. So what was the relationship between Cassio and Desdemona? I mean, were they like friends, really close, or what? Because obviously Cassio likes women, just saying, and he's obviously handsome, and obviously Desdemona is beautiful as well. This will be the planting of a seed that will sprout into, as lines 163, 165 say of 3:3, beware the green-eyed monster jealousy. Ironically, Iago will say. And it is true. Let's just put this in our notes. This is a play, very much like the poems of Browning, those dramatic monologues that we study together as exemplar texts of My Last Duchess and Porphyra's Lover. Here we have a play that demonstrates what happens when somebody gets really, really jealous. Now, we've got interesting jealousies going on in this play. Put them in your notes. Obviously, one is Iago towards Cassio and Othello, no question. But we were also going to ask about the jealousies between Desdemona and Emilia in the betrayal act that Emilia will commit by, here in a few moments, taking Desdemona's handkerchief. So we're going to ask about this notion of jealousy. You'll go back at 3a to our comments about that second monster of Beowulf, Beowulf's mother, as allegorical or representative of metaphysical evil, the kind of evil that you can't see coming so easily. And obviously envy is one of those. Jealousy is one of those. Iago will plant the seed. He will say to Othello, you need to start watching Cassio more closely because, think of it, Desdemona deceived her father. She might, in fact, have deceived you as well. I've often said to you guys that here's one of the problems with being in any way a good liar, right? So if you're a good liar, you're going out your mom. Where are you going? Oh, I'm going X, and you're not. You're going Y, and you're really good at that. I have said to you guys that one of the problems with that is that what happens when you're a mother or a father later and you ask your son or daughter, where are you going? Oh, I'm going X. Here's the problem, of course. How easily will you be able to trust, knowing full well that you yourself are a bit of a deceiver? Iago, of course, is going to deceive Othello, and Othello doesn't see it coming at all. Iago will suggest as well, in some of the most racist language of the play, that in fact, think of it, he says to Othello, look at you, look at the beautiful Desdemona. It was unnatural for her to ever really want to be with you in the first place. And if that's her tendencies towards unnatural liaisons, then it's not altogether impossible to imagine that she might mess around with somebody like Cassio. There seems to be a suggestion that she might have messed around with Cassio before she ever met. There seems to be a suggestion that she is messing around with him, like right now. In other words, right now while we're talking together, do you know where your wife is? And instead of Othello showing that calm presence that he showed at the beginning of the play, now he's ready to begin to ask questions to himself and in his mind. And we'll begin to see the real psychic fragility of Othello. That will be some of the most disturbing aspects of this play. That Othello can be so strong and confident as a man at the beginning of the play. And Iago, with just a few words, is able to unlock a certain kind of fragility. Why? Othello is the other in this play. Not only in his skin color, but he's the other from an outside source. And as he arrives in Venice, he is the other. He's a celebrity, amazing, gifted man in every way, and yet clearly he knows people are suspicious of him. And of course, they feel threatened by him, and he lives with all of that. In remarkable speed, alacrity, in this scene, Othello will provide us with a soliloquy in which he says it out loud. He has lost his love. He uses the word picture of the falcon and the falconer. We'll come back to this in W.B. Yeats' Second Coming. The idea that the falcon can no longer be a part of the falconer. He's lost her in some way. We have then Desdemona with Othello, and already we begin to see the psychic fragility of Othello. He's having these terrible headaches. He'll have these near epileptic fits that Iago will bring on in the questions. He's ill. He's ill. Desdemona, it's clear that Desdemona and Othello didn't know each other for very long. They got together through these stories of Othello's. They fell in love, they got married, they eloped, and in the hastiness of all of that, there were things that Desdemona didn't learn about Othello. And there's things that Othello maybe didn't learn about Desdemona. Like, for example, her intense loyalty and fidelity. He wasn't with her long enough to realize how intensely loyal she was. Desdemona will take out a handkerchief, and this is one of those bizarre moments on stage that becomes almost comic in its tragedy. She has her handkerchief. Now, this is a special handkerchief. We'll learn that Othello's mother gave it to him. He's supposed to give it to his wife. It's got this special significance. We go back to these words at the beginning of the play about witchcraft, and you get some sense that Othello is very superstitious about this handkerchief that he has given to Desdemona, and she will reach to try and put it on his head. He will push it away. The handkerchief has to fall. In a performance, it's important the way that it falls to the floor. And of course, nobody's going to see it other than Amelia. She sees it. The best friend, if you want to call her that, of Desdemona. And yet she doesn't say to Desdemona, "Hey, pal, you lost your handkerchief, let me give it to you." Instead, she picks it up and she will take the handkerchief to her husband, Iago. Now, why she does this, again, we're back to the psychological question of motivations for actions. Why she does this, not totally clear. And yet it is clear that the relationship between Amelia and Iago is not a good one at all. You've got this really interesting broken relationship, and then you've got this potentially really great relationship with Othello and Desdemona, and at the end, of course, the tragedies will implode on both counts. She gives the handkerchief, and then we have Iago with another soliloquy. It is an amazing thing, and I would challenge you to do this on your own, to study the soliloquies of Hamlet in 1, 2, 3, and even 4, and the soliloquies of Iago throughout this play, and watch how they progress. We learn new things about Iago in each one of them. And it's at this moment that Iago is literally talking with the audience. You think I'm bad? You haven't seen anything yet. Watch what I do once I've got this handkerchief. Because he's going to be able to use it as what Othello will call ocular proof. You can see it with your eyes. Simple. He's going to plant the napkin, the handkerchief, in Cassio's bedroom. Cassio will have no idea what it is, and that's going to play it out. Othello then will enter, come back. He's clearly very upset. He will even say it, "I am unmanned, unsoldiered," and he will demand proof. In fact, he goes so far as to actually seem as if he's going to kill Iago if Iago doesn't come up with proof. And all Iago has to say is, "I think I saw Cassio holding the handkerchief that you gave your wife." Othello will say, "Oh, if it's that." That's enough for him. And of course, the audience is almost wanting to shout, and probably did in Shakespeare's day because he welcomed it from the groundlings. "No, just ask her, ask her." Of course, Othello is going to ask about the handkerchief here in a while. Othello will say that his love for Desdemona is over and that it's time to kill her, and Iago will in fact promise to kill Cassio. He says, "I am your own forever." And it's interesting, Othello will say this, "I am your own Iago will say this, "I am your own forever." And notice the play on words with the word own. In other words, I belong to you, but more importantly, you belong to me. 3-4. tragic already scene beginning to build here. Desdemona will ask Emilia, "Hey, where's my handkerchief? Have you seen it?" Emilia won't answer that she has. Desdemona will ask Othello again about Cassio. Come on, what about Cassio? Are you gonna take him back into your close friendship again? And Othello is only interested in now the handkerchief. Where's the handkerchief? Interestingly, Desdemona doesn't admit she's lost it. She could simply say, I was mopping your head with it and I dropped it. I must have dropped it. She won't do that. Why won't she do that? Again, this leads to those questions about motivations of behavior. Why won't she just say out loud, "I dropped it"? She won't. And in the process, this will be enough for Othello. He will storm out mad, leaving, of course, Desdemona and Emilia to have a brief conversation about a jealous husband. Desdemona just can't see at all what's going on either. Iago then and Cassio will show up on stage with Desdemona. And Cassio's like, "Okay, is it time for us to talk with Desdemona?" "I don't think now's the best of time." Then all of a sudden, Cassio left alone on stage, and we meet Bianca, who is a lover, a prostitute, a lover of Cassio. And she will berate him for not coming to her. And this is, again, this notion of the extension of 2 times, because she makes it seem like he's been with her for a while and then not been with her for a while. And Cassio will give the handkerchief to Bianca. "Here, I want you to copy the insignia on this thing," and then, blah, 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 and on it goes. And Bianca will take the handkerchief. The handkerchief will then become the central symbol of betrayal in many ways. The 4th and the 5th acts, of course, are going to plunge us into terrible, tragic darkness. Let's go through them quickly. 4:1. Iago will kill Othello, and that is to say his Psyche. And Othello will begin to have these incredible fits. And in the process of doing so, Iago, will hide Othello, with Cassio then coming to have a conversation. Iago serves as the fulcrum throughout all the action of this 3rd, 4th, and 5th act. It's quite a remarkable thing to watch on stage. The energy, the subtle, snake-like, and we've got to use that term, and I think that's such a pivotal way to read Milton's Paradise Lost later. Iago slithers, and we even have some serpentine kinds of language. He slithers through this play the way, of course, that serpent slithers in the Garden of Eden in the Genesis 3 story, right? And what will happen is that Othello is off to the side. Now, how this is always done on stage is fascinating. Othello is off to the side, unknown by Cassio that he's there. And Iago will step up to Cassio just out of earshot, and he will ask him about Bianca. But he will whisper Bianca. And then he'll say something about Desdemona and use the name aloud. And then he'll go back to Bianca. And he will ask some sexual kinds of questions about the relationship between Bianca and Cassio. And Cassio will say out loud things about Bianca. Othello thinks that he's saying them out loud about Desdemona. It will be at this moment that we will then have the famous, "Here comes Bianca with the handkerchief." And she says to Iago, or to Cassio, "I don't know where you got this handkerchief. I'm sure it's probably from some other lover. Take it back." Cassio, of course, has no idea where this handkerchief came from. And the moment that Othello sees this, he puts the 2 and 2 together. And of course, it's completely the wrong 2 and 2. And yet there it is. We then have this interesting moment where we've got to be reminded that Othello and all these people came from Venice. And so we've got the Lodovico showing up and making some observations about a letter that is going to call back home Othello. And when Desdemona hears about this initially, she says, "Good." And there's something about the relationship between Cassio and all of this, because Cassio is about to take over and run the show in Cyprus to bring Othello back home. And Othello will slap Desdemona across the face. It's the first act of physical violence. You would think that this would lead Desdemona to say, "There's something fundamentally wrong with the man I married, and I'm going to have to distance myself until I figure out what's going on." It's not what she does. And it's in this moment that everybody involved begins to wonder about Othello's mental state. Of course, we're the audience that knows why Othello is going through this. 4:2, Othello has an interesting conversation with Emilia, who he clearly does not trust, and he asks outright, Cassio and Desdemona been together? Never, my lord. She says, never. Yeah, I know you women, I don't trust you women. We see this in almost all of Shakespeare's dark tragedies. Remember Hamlet, frailty thy name is woman. We got this notion that there's, I don't trust you. We think about Lear and his daughters and the ways in which he can't trust them. And there's this just sense that Othello just doesn't trust women at all anyway. And, Emilia can't put two and two together. She doesn't understand about the handkerchief because she hasn't seen any of this. Othello then is with Desdemona, and he in fact outright calls her terrible names. He accuses her of being a woman who sleeps with other men, a whore. And he leaves, leaving again Emilia and Desdemona to ask what's going on with Othello. You get a sense that maybe Emilia is a little bit jealous of the relationship of true love between Desdemona and Othello. At least that's what it was. And maybe she wants to see if she can kind of bring that relationship down to a more normal level with her. Why she doesn't confide about the handkerchief and that kind of thing. No, your guess is as good as anybody else's. Bring in Iago. Oh, is there a problem? Desdemona, dark irony. She will ask for help, and Iago will promise things shall be well. Dark irony, because of course the plans are already in place. You then will have an exchange between Roderigo and Iago. Roderigo keeps coming back, and every time he's on stage, this is irony. He is the supposed clown fool of the play, and yet every time he's on stage, he says the truth about Iago. You are a villain, you're a liar. But Iago is so good with language